Good morning.
Good morning.
Make sure you can hear me, all right? Well, thank you for braving the cold. I know we've had some nice spell of warm weather, but chilly one for us. Not so much for our guests from Chicago. So.
Yeah, this is balmy weather.
But welcome. Brian Martin, our guest today, is the second speaker in the Romain Market Maker Speaker Series. The first speaker, some of you may have attended, was David Siminoff from Silicon Valley. So we want to welcome Brian. So just a quick introduction here, and then I'll turn the stage over. Some of you might know this, but the CEO of Google DeepMind, Demis Hassabis, you may have heard his name. He won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for leading the development of this AI platform that can predict the structure of proteins. Now, this is not a talk on chemistry, but just a little chemistry I know. And why is that important? When you're developing medicines, how a drug molecule interacts with a protein apparently depends on the structure of the protein, as I was chatting with Brian yesterday over dinner. And so Brian Martin is at AbbVie, the Chief AI Officer, where they're also involved in developing treatments and medicines. And what this AI platform that AlphaFold, which they use as well, that Google developed, has really shortened the time it takes to discover medicines, from trial and error 1 to 5 years to much shorter now. At AbbVie, Mr. Martin is involved in, that's one piece, but also leveraging AI to build what they call data convergence, using data from genomics, data on clinical trials, of course, AlphaFold, to do what's coming down the road, which is precision medicine and personalized medicine. Right now, if you have a headache, you might go pick up an Advil or Tylenol. Your Advil looks the same as mine. And so that's going to be different going down the road. So Brian's going to be talking about AI, just not in healthcare, but across different fields. Many of you use AI already, or ChatGPT version, but there's lots of other applications of AI. And the Romain Market Maker Series, we invite folks who are really creating whole new markets, and Brian's really engaged in that enterprise. And hosting the conversation today, along with Brian, is our own Professor Dr. Nick Rue, Professor of Management, Chair of the Department of Management and Information Sciences. Some of you have had his class. As you know, he's got a very engaging performative style. So thanks, Nick, for hosting that. And let's give a warm USI welcome to Brian Martin and Nick Rue.
Thank you. All right. Good morning. Good morning. This is exciting. We just came off of an engaging breakfast, and so I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, the conversation this morning here with a lot of students in the room. What a great turnout. Not just students, though. I recognize a lot of students, but also folks from outside the student community. And I think that's a testament to the topic and the importance of the topic and something everyone is wrestling with, AI in the workforce. So Brian Martin, Chief AI Product Owner at AbbVie. I'd like to get started actually by kind of going through those three pieces in reverse order. Perfect. I want to talk a little bit about AbbVie for folks in the room, then a little bit about the job itself that you're doing, sure, and then a little bit about you and how you got to that job. Sure. And then we'll go in maybe to some of the AI revolution at AbbVie and elsewhere. How does that work? So tell us about AbbVie as a company. What do folks in the room today need to know about AbbVie?
Sure. So AbbVie is a global biopharmaceutical company. You have probably, if you have watched television or been to a sporting event in the past 5 to 10 years, you've probably seen an ad, one of those horrible drug ads with people running through fields or swimming in ponds and talking about how this drug is going to make your life brilliantly better for some sort of things, right? So, but most people don't know, AbbVie is actually the third largest biopharmaceutical company in the world. We have a gross revenue that is somewhere over $70 billion a year. The company's market cap is right now somewhere around $430 billion. So it's a fairly substantial company. We have 60,000 employees in 145 countries around the globe, engaging in everything from the pharmaceutical R&D to commercial efforts, manufacturing, legal, we have writers, we have ethicists, we have just about every potential career that you can imagine. As a global company, we have those types of folks in those roles. And so from the AI perspective, we're not just solving the R&D question, but we're trying to solve the same questions that a law firm is trying to solve, or that an accounting firm is trying to solve, or that a political science or a community organization that is trying to do community organizing and push for policy changes are trying to solve, right? So we've actually got people in all those areas, and we're trying to bring these technology tools to all of those different areas, not just the R&D focus.
So AbbVie, we were talking earlier this morning a little bit about AbbVie's founding as a spinoff. Talk about that for just a second.
Yeah, so AbbVie was founded as a spin-out from Abbott Labs. So Abbott Labs is a 100-plus-year-old organization with a real focus on diagnostics and nutritionals today. And they were at a point where they were considering the different risk profiles of that business versus a pharmaceutical business, which is high risk but high reward. And it has long development cycles compared to much shorter product development cycles and business models. And so they spun AbbVie off and saying, well, we've got this thing, we don't know if it's going to be successful or not, so let's offload that risk by spinning it off as a separate company. And that company was spun off with basically like one drug as the asset. And that drug wasn't even approved for the market at that point. It was still in development. Well, that drug turned out to be very, very successful. And so you can kind of joke that AbbVie was a startup with about $10 billion of initial funding and support, which is a pretty convenient way to start a company and start an organization. Since then, the company has grown significantly. 40-plus medicines in the market. We have over 100-plus medicines in our pipeline development covering a number of different therapeutic areas, whether it's immunology, oncology, aesthetics, ophthalmology, all kinds of other areas that we're trying to keep that nice diversified portfolio of different products to help people in different areas where we can cross-leverage the scientific learning and the commercial efforts in the manufacturing process.
Terrific. Before we go any further, I'd like to draw your attention to the screen. There's a QR code. If, as we're going through the interview, you have questions you'd like to ask Brian this morning, please use the QR code to submit those questions. That's what I'm thumbing through here on my tablet. I'll refresh to make sure I get them, and we'll try to work those in where appropriate. All right. So that's a little bit about AbbVie, an interesting kind of founding. It's nice to have a startup that starts with $10 billion.
Yeah, it's kind of nice.
A drug that hit, I guess
all
it
the
had to have hit
employees.
just after the
So
after the startup.
The
spin-off.
drug was in the development, which is one of the highest risk parts of the pharmaceutical cycle, right? Clinical trials can cost on the range of $1 million a week to run a clinical trial. It normally costs somewhere between $4 and $6 billion, and it takes between 10 and 12 years to bring a medicine from the first instance in a lab to the first patient in the marketplace. And that process, 7 to 9 steps in that pipeline, that process, 80 to 80+% failure rates at every step in that process. So there are very few business models or businesses out there where you have such high failure rates at every step in the process that you have to navigate. And so if you're a large company and you see this investment and it's a large potential risk coming into that next stage, that's why they spun off AbbVie. But obviously the success through there, and once a drug is approved, means you have a period of exclusivity where nobody else can make that drug. That effectively it's a constrained monopoly in some cases, if you want to think about it that way, designed to help the company recoup that $4 to $6 billion and all of the effort and investment in recovering that drug. And so that's something that's very unique about the pharmaceutical market, is that high investment up front, potentially high returns if your drug succeeds, but considering the failure rates, considering the number of times that once you take it out of a lab and put it into a person, and once you put it into a population that you experience failures, it's significant. And so there are a vast number of drugs that will get all the way through the process. They'll get into patients, And once you have it in patients at scale, you find it doesn't work, or it's not safe, and it ends up being recalled off the market. And it creates big swings and big shifts that are hard to plan for a large company.
Interesting, and an interesting context for AI and trying to better predict
Better
what will
predict
hit
those successes
or what will
and
not
shifts.
hit. But it is an interesting and unique industry context, as we were discussing earlier. 14 years of protected revenues,
Yep.
essentially, and then overnight, 90% decline.
Gone.
And so it's a fascinating industry for some of you who are interested maybe in that realm. All right, so that's pharmaceutical industry. Not necessarily the topic of today's talk.
Right.
Obviously, a context for the topic of
Important
today's
context,
talk. But talk to us about the role Chief
Yeah.
AI Product Owner.
Right. So my focus is how do we use AI across the company internally? How do we build products for our people to bring the medicines to patients faster and safer using AI technologies? There's an interesting difference between a life sciences or pharma company and a healthcare company, right? So while our products are for patients, those products are pharmaceuticals, right? The products, we're not bringing AI products to market. We're not a technology company. But our AI products are the things that we build and we deploy internally to enable the company to bring those pharmaceutical products to markets faster. Now, in the age of personalized and precision medicine, and those are two slightly different, nuanced things, AI is playing a more interesting part in the development of products, something we call combination devices, where if you think of an insulin pump for somebody with diabetes, the ability to actually sense, detect, and predict when that drug should be administered to the patient is something that is a heck of a lot better done more in real time than it is from the person having to prick their finger every hour, say where their blood sugar is, where it was, where it's going to be. I'm about to eat this apple. What do I need to do? So you've seen things like insulin pumps become methods by which you can variably administer the dose of a drug in that real-time context. And more, those devices are getting smarter and smarter. And so you are seeing this development of AI products that actually go into the patient space. I, fortunately, don't have to deal with any of those. We have specific teams that focus on that patient space. So my product space is really that, how do I enable the company and the internal people at the company with the AI technologies that we can bring to bear.
And you said there's 60,000.
We've got about 60,000 employees. About 30,000 of those are knowledge workers. So those are folks who are either sitting at a desk or standing at a bench in a chemistry or biology lab or doing some work of that type. The others are actually manufacturing folks. They're working in manufacturing facilities around the globe where we actually have whole factories that do the production, that actually create that. And so we have a lot of folks who their work is not at a desk at a computer. It's in a plant on a manufacturing line working on that part of the process.
So you're Chief AI Product Officer at AbbVie. How long have you been, when did you take on that role?
So I joined AbbVie in 2018. I was the company's first AI explicit employee.
In 2018?
In 2018. And so we've spent the past 7+ years early on doing a lot of education and proof of concept work, specifically focused on the R&D space, trying to get scientists and business folks to understand what the impact of this technology was going to be. There wasn't a lot of awareness. A lot of the scientists knew about some of the statistical algorithms. So if there are any computer science or data science folks, things like support vector machines or random forest algorithms and things like that that we've known about for decades plus, right? These are algorithms and technology. I see somebody smiling and laughing in the back there, yeah. We've known actually about those since the 50s and 60s. But the actual ability to apply those at speed and at scale took a couple of generations of computer advancement and data advancement to really get us to where we can start to apply those to things like a predictive algorithm in an insulin pump or in some sort of structure like that.
All right, so you joined AbbVie in 2018. Let's talk about Brian Martin, the individual and the path from the early days to 2018. How about that?
So I started my education at a small undergraduate liberal arts school in Michigan named Alma College, 1,500 students in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. I did my education there, and while I was there, I developed the first website for the car company Saturn. I designed the first piece of software that let you configure a car, choose your paint color, choose your features. We thought we were hot stuff at the time. We put that out on the web. I don't know even how many people remember Saturn, the car company, but
Probably a few.
a couple, 2-3 people here might do that. But started that in college. And so I actually ran the website for Saturn from my dorm room my senior year of college, and then moved to Spring Hill. Yeah, and some folks who I knew who had a Saturn retailer at the time, a lot of fascinating, interesting overlap there. But after that, I actually came to Evansville, and I spent 3 years in Evansville. On the north side of Evansville, there's the headquarters of a national music fraternity, Phi Mu Alpha, and so I built out the IT systems for Phi Mu Alpha to do membership management, their website and their content. Spent a few years here in Evansville and then decided to go from nonprofit to nothing but profit. I moved to Chicago and began working in the high frequency trading and prop trading market space. So literally opposite ends of the spectrum at that point. I spent about 10 years through the transition from open outcry trading to electronic trading, building those systems. Then I went into consulting. I was brought on when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac lost like $6 billion of taxpayer money in the whole mortgage-backed security crisis. I began flying to Washington, D.C. every week for 2.5 years.
Sounds
from
absolutely
Chicago.
terrible.
It was horrible, although the United Miles were a nice thing to build up over that time. But we were building a new platform to look at that mortgage-backed securitization process and how do we make it objective? How do we actually take the subjectivity of risk calculation out of that? How do we build new models for risk analysis and put those into place in a way that can do that? And so now that platform handles all mortgage-backed securitization here in the US. So think about a computer platform that manages $12.7 trillion worth of assets, is all running on Amazon Web Services. So you want to talk about moving too big to fail from one place to another, the government just did that. So found my way then to pharma through, honestly, and this is the best part, playing trivia at the local brewery in my town. And somebody said, hey, you should go meet with this friend of mine who works at this company called AbbVie. And about 3 weeks later, I found myself working at a pharmaceutical company. So very random path to get to where I've been.
So an automotive retailing website.
Yep.
IT for a music fraternity.
Yep.
Here in town. Mortgage-backed security, creditworthiness predictions on.
Yep. Trading and finance algorithms.
To pharmaceuticals.
To pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to find a common thread other than
non-standard path, for sure.
So at the small school in Michigan,
Yep.
What did you study?
Computer science and cognitive science, which at the point was the term we were using for AI research without calling it AI research, because calling it AI research meant people would laugh at you and not fund your department. So we called it cognitive science at the time, but it was effectively the overlap of neuroscience, linguistics, computer software, computer development, and philosophy. Effectively all the things that make up the research in AI. And I studied opera performance.
So computer science, cognitive science, and opera performance, which might help to explain the music fraternity.
Right.
Link. You still doing opera work?
I don't sing anymore, no. I very early on when I was living in Nashville, south of Nashville, I was singing with Nashville Symphony and with the Cincinnati Pops, and made the decision that I like to feed myself and clothe myself and house myself on a regular basis. So I opted out of the music side of things and dedicated myself on the computer side of things.
But it is interesting that you ended up, for at least a time, building out IT infrastructure for a music fraternity.
And I think the key there is to understand that just like that was needed by the music fraternity, the AI capabilities have that same portability across every industry, every type of company, every space that we're looking at. And it is a tool. It is nothing more than a tool. Anyone who says it is more than a tool is missing the point. It is a very powerful tool. It is a tool that can enable a lot of really transformational things. But in the end, it is just a tool.
So let's go back to your work at AbbVie and kind of leading AI at AbbVie. What's been the evolution of that? You talked about kind of some of the knowledge, some of the training work early on to kind of say, hey, this is what this is. But what's been the evolution? Because maybe actually before we get there, we should clarify, when we say AI, what do you mean? When we're talking about AI, what do you mean specifically?
I'm going to use it as a horrible boilerplate term for a whole bunch of stuff. The term itself has been so mangled over the past decades from when it was originally coined that it can refer to a whole bunch of things, whether that's machine learning, deep learning, predictive algorithms, cognitive computing, any of these types of things. Automation gets thrown into that bucket a lot. There's a lot of knowledge work that fits in the AI space. And so when I say AI stuff, I'm referring to a whole swath of things, not anything specifically.
So what's been the evolution of integrating that stuff and in what steps at AbbVie?
Yeah, so we target sort of three kinds of value with three types of AI. So if we think about, there's a feedback cycle of people, data, and tools, and what creates the momentum in a company using those things. Tools create what we call operational value. That's the traditional efficiency constructs. I can do more with less. I can do things faster. Right? That type of value is delivered by a better tool. That value is delivered to a person who experiences what we call experiential value. I have a better tool, I have a better experience. The data that I capture from people's experience becomes the foundation of analytical value, which I then use to make better predictions that are more precise and more accurate, which helps me then design better tools, more effective tools, which develops better experiences. And now you see how the feedback cycle engages. Now, where a company chooses to start, do we have sufficient data to target analytical value first? Or do we have a significant enough operational and execution challenge that we can target that efficiency operational value first? That's one of these open questions. If I'm going to plug AI in, where do I start in that cycle to create that momentum in that cycle? And for R&D, when I first came in, we started with the analytical value, right? We started with the, how do we make better predictions on which molecule will be a success? How do we actually design and predict better molecules in general, generate them using models and that? We continued to work on that, and then we rapidly found that even though we had the massive amounts of data, we actually didn't have enough. Human biology is so complex that the amount of data needed to really model human biology, we just have fragments of. And so we said, okay, well, then we got to get more data. How do we get more data? Well, we need people to have better experiences, and the only way they're going to get them is if we build better tools. So then we focused our effort on creating better tools for our lab scientists. How do we create tools that make their lab processes more efficient, scale them to a higher degree that allows them to generate more data? And that's where we are today, is we are still building a lot of operational value-focused tools to drive that experience for our scientists in the lab to enable even greater data creation so that we can build better models that will feed that cycle back.
So it's still kind of on the predictive side of things.
Eventually you want to complete the cycle. We started with analytical value. We've shifted to operational value to feed our experiential value. Also, we can build more data to go back to analytical value again.
So what does that look like going forward for AbbVie?
Sure. So it looks right now exactly like what you probably all see every day. Your ChatGPT, your general productivity tools, your Microsoft Copilots, things like that. When you think about the business work of a knowledge worker, right? What does a knowledge worker do? They look at data, they generate content, they process content, they consume scientific literature and knowledge, and that's what these tools that we've started to see gain so much momentum in the marketplace today are really focused on. It's how do I use language models to extract knowledge from content? How do I use the prediction of language to take a concept or content and generate it in a language that allows me to share it with other people in a meaningful way? And so our focus internally has been how do we build out those capabilities for all of our end users. Now, one of the interesting challenges that we have is intellectual property and security around our data. We can't have a scientist go say, here are 20 new molecules and put those all directly into the public chat GPT. That would be bad. I'll underline, italicize, and bold that. You know, the incident that happened with the engineer at Samsung, for folks who haven't heard, where he was trying to understand a technical document pre-patent in a new model of a Samsung phone device, and he uploaded that document into a public chat GPT tool, which then consumed and learned from that data, and when somebody else went to ask a question, it regurgitated some of that information from an unreleased private pre-competitive document out of Samsung, right? So this is the risk of using a general public tool. So we had to build our own ecosystem internally of these tools and everything to protect the intellectual property and to protect the security and privacy of our data, but leveraging these same capabilities. And that's some of the products that we've now been building over the past 2.5 years to really enable that.
So do those 60,000 employees comply with that, though?
Here's what's interesting. So when we first released our internal ChatGPT equivalent tool, we only told our IT people about it. We did not go tell the rest of the company about it. So we've got about 3,000 IT employees, and we had almost 90% of those employees using exclusively our tools within the first couple of months. What was interesting is by the end of the first 6 months of use, we had 11,000 users. But we only had announced the tools to 3,000 IT employees. So it proved to us that the rumor mill and the, oh, hey, why don't you just use this? I didn't know we had that. Where did that come from? Was actually sufficient to actually spread the information to over a third of our knowledge workers within 6 months. In November of 2024, we held one event, and we invited all of the VPs, every vice president from across the company, to one site, and we demonstrated, we had a lot of talk, it was a summit, if you will, and since that, we've seen our utilization grow now to where we have 27,000 people using our internal tool every day. We process around 2.5 to 3 million ChatGPT style requests per day in our platform, and that is from every division and every department of the company. Now, there are still people who are paying for ChatGPT or for Claude or for Gemini or, God help us, for Grok on their own credit cards or on the company credit cards. And so there is both a big G and a little g governance that needs to step in to control some of the risks there. But as long as people are using the tools responsibly, we actually don't have a problem with that. The key with that is just making sure that they've had enough education to know this is a problem that it is safe and okay for me to take to a public tool versus this is not a problem I want exposing our data or concept to a public tool in that space.
Wow, it's a significant risk, though, especially in a context that's so dependent on that intellectual property. It's related to a question we have from the group here with the AI becoming more common in healthcare. How is patient privacy being addressed? Not that different of a question than trade secrets.
Sure.
Or sensitive information for trial participants.
Yep.
Or
PII, PHI, so privately identified information or private health information, we tend to avoid almost completely. We work with de-identified data sets in our work because we're not directly engaging with patients except in the clinic, right? When we're working with patients in a clinical trial, maintaining the blinded data, the blinded identification information for those patients, that is one of those areas where we work with that. But that's where building our own internal tools allow us to guarantee the privacy mechanisms and security mechanisms around that. One of the more interesting challenges in this space that we've run into, and I don't think we've seen it play out yet in healthcare, but I expect it's coming, is the concept of legal e-discoverability. So one of the first use cases that folks all over the place really engaged in was, I'm going to record and transcribe my meeting, and I'm going to then feed the transcription into an AI tool to summarize the meeting minutes. So I don't have to manually keep meeting minutes for a meeting with all these people. Huge productivity booster, right? That is one of the 3 use cases that we know gave us over 250,000 hours of full-time employee time back in 2024 using these tools. And that 250,000 hours is a low estimate. That's only looking at a third of our utilization use cases gave that back. So high value, high frequency use of this. But once you do that, you create something that can be legally e-discoverable in the case of a lawsuit. And there is already a case right now where somebody said something in a meeting that was e-discoverable that has the potential to actually affect that exclusivity, where the ability to claim the intellectual property and patent rights on a molecule is now in question because something that someone said in a meeting was caught in a transcription, and when a company sued another company for it, that transcription was discovered as part of that legal e-discovery, and it now has put that company's patent for their drug at risk. So this is one of those interesting concerns, like, wow, the productivity is great, it's amazing, but what is the potential of these downstream risks? And so when we think of the same thing in terms of healthcare, gentleman from Ascension Health that was at our breakfast this morning, they're facing huge security risks, but they're also looking for opportunities to improve patient care. How are they going to balance the challenge there of maintaining that patient privacy and the patient while still trying to use those tools to improve the patient experience? This is the challenge that business leaders are going to face for the next 2 to 5 years while we still have these conversations about what is the right, appropriate, and safe usage of these tools in every workplace.
So on the case of e-discovery, the efficiency gains are wonderful. It's wonderful not to take notes during a meeting, but knowing it's recorded and going to be transcribed, and there's been these cases, does that then chill the creativity or the idea discussion that happens in a meeting that has to happen?
When this first potential of this type of risk came out, our chief legal officer of the company said, we are disabling all audio transcription of all meetings overnight. Think of all those people who were used to leveraging that to improve their productivity, seeing that go away. The repercussions of the barrage of emails that our legal teams received from the "how could you do this to me" of the people across the company is such that now we're seeing it come back, right? And so the companies are going to go through this cycle till eventually we come to this sort of homeostasis in what's the right balance of productivity and value versus risk. But the key for that is we need to be having more conversations. And that, I think, is one of the real opportunities, why I love coming to universities and educational institutions, because these are the facilities where those conversations need to be happening. Companies don't have the time, the energy, or the resources to say, hey, we're going to go sit for half a day. We're going to have a deep discussion around how to balance these potential risks and everything. Additionally, a lot of folks at those companies haven't grown up with the technology, the data, and these AI capabilities the way that a lot of our youth today have. Right? The high school students today are the last non-AI native generation. Middle school kids today have never lived in a world where Alexa wasn't something you had to be careful what room you said that word in, right? That idea that there might be a device listening for that keyword, powered by AI in the back end and capturing data. We all remember, I'm guessing, most of even the younger folks in this room probably still have memory of a world where that didn't exist. But middle school kids today don't. And we joke about, we half-heartedly and joke about like, oh, they don't even know what a floppy disk is and stuff like that. But the fact is that is this pace of technology progress that is so hard from a business and technology perspective to process and understand. And we have to be talking more about it. And so I really think that universities and educational institutions are the place for that type of debate, that type of discussion to really take place amongst the theory and at the bridge between theory and application.
Let's, I want to go back to the 250,000 hours saved efficiency. What are some of like that, and what are some of the other outcomes for AbbVie in real dollars and cents that have been the result of AI integration?
Well, I'll be careful about actual numbers, because I can only talk about numbers we've actually made public and have been approved and stuff, right? So I'll explain where the 250,000 hours comes from, right? So when we look at our utilization of our general purpose AI tool, 30% of the utilization was from 3 use cases. Use case number 1, which I just talked about, was meeting transcription, right? Being able to do minutes for meetings and that. Use case number 2 was help me rewrite or redraft this communication, whether it's an email or a memo or a letter. And use case number 3 was, I want to process and understand this piece of scientific literature or this long legal argument or something like that. It's processing content to extract knowledge and understanding. And if we attribute 5 minutes of time savings to help me rewrite this email or memo, 10 minutes of time savings to help me draft these meeting minutes, and 30 minutes of time savings to help me understand this scientific paper or piece of legal content, and then we multiply that out, that's how we get to the 250,000 hour number. Now keep in mind what I just said, that that's only 30% of the utilization of our platform. So there's another 70% of use that we don't even know what the value potential it's providing. And yes, there's probably a lot of generate a picture of a cat flying a jet plane that happens in there. There's probably a lot of, can you analyze the sports teams in this league for me and tell me who's going to win the playoffs, right? We know there's a lot of that, and that's fine, and it's not productivity gathering. But when 30% you can attribute to that, that's a huge number. Now, the problem comes, I can't go to an executive and say, we saved over 250,000 hours of full-time employee time, because you know what their response is going to be. Who are the 80 people you got rid of, right? Who are the 80 headcount I no longer need to have at this company? And the answer is actually, well, let's go back. I've got 20,000 to 30,000 people. So that 250,000 hours over a year divided by 20 to 30,000 people means they all got about 10 hours back. And so when you do the math that way, now you can say, okay, well, what does it mean when I give an employee 10 hours back a month in their time? What does that mean to them? Well, for employees that are over-allocated, it means coming back to a sense of normalcy and sanity, right? I don't feel like I'm going 120 miles an hour because I've got this tool that helps me maintain some of that. And for employees who otherwise wouldn't be as productive because they don't know necessarily how to get or find resources and do things, this helps them actually reach that 100% productivity barrier in a more useful way. So this is the challenge of how you message those savings to your organization and to your leadership so that they will continue to fund what you're doing and not be like, okay, well, you've got to do this. Now, there are other use cases we know where we can take and reduce clinical trial times by many weeks. And remember when I said it's $1 million a week to run a trial. AbbVie runs 100 clinical trials a year. So if I can take 100 clinical trials and pull 2 weeks of time out of 100 clinical trials, that's $200 million, right? That is the level of substantial impact that you can have. And when you do some thinking about what's in those processes, you can see how that constriction comes in and how you can do some of that math and apply.
And so that's pretty easy to convey.
It's pretty easy.
That's
The
very
operational
easy to convey.
value is easy.
The 5 and 10 minutes here and there,
It's much harder.
is much more difficult.
Yeah, and we see that more through employee morale and satisfaction metrics than we do in actual dollars and cents metrics. AbbVie continues to have, culturally, one of the best workplaces by every objective audit that gets done. We actually survey, we have an independent company come and survey our employees every 2 years, asking them about the culture of the company, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be improved. And we've seen significant improvements in that through AI that we can attribute to some of these AI tools that we brought to the workplace.
Interesting. And so then also maybe declines in voluntary turnover and
Less churn in employees, which means higher retention of knowledge institutional knowledge we're coming upon right now for companies that are large and well-established. We're coming upon something that some people are calling the great exit or the great forgetting. As the baby boomer population starts to leave and retire out of the workplace, it will be the largest exit of corporate and institutional knowledge in the history of the working body, right? How do we preserve that knowledge? And there's a gentleman, Ron Tite, who had a great clip on LinkedIn I love. He's like, how do you preserve what Karen in accounting knows that you have to elbow the printer twice to get it to print, right? Where is that knowledge? And I'm speaking metaphorically there, but how is that knowledge going to be preserved? Building systems and platforms where AI can capture that knowledge from those folks and make it part of the cognitive enterprise, right? The systems and the knowledge platforms that become the core of a cognitive enterprise. That's the technical architectural challenge that AI is going to hopefully help us solve at some of these large organizations. To enable new, younger mindsets, younger thinking to come in and have access to all of that institutional knowledge so that we don't end up repeating historical mistakes.
So an interesting question here from the crowd. I've been told that to use AI effectively, more people should be using it as an advanced thought partner rather than an idea generator. Do you agree with this sentiment? And do you think this also applies kind of more broadly in business?
I think you should use the AI however it feels comfortable to you or uncomfortable to you. And I say that there's I hate to be the book recommender, but if you haven't read Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, it's one of the best books out there that helps explain some of the potential impacts of bringing that augmented AI to your work and to what you do. And Ethan talks about what he calls his 3 sleepless nights with ChatGPT. Right? And the first night, he got on the tool and he spent all night just being like, what does this thing even do? Just trying to figure out what it could possibly do and being amazed by all the things that it could do. But then he spent the second night sleepless, like playing with it, breaking it, being like, well, you can't do that. Well, why doesn't it work for that? And trying to understand what it couldn't do. And then third sleepless night was trying to figure out, okay, well now how do I actually apply this to the work that I need to accomplish? And so that 3 sleepless nights approach is how some of our training we have started to build for our employees. Like we spend the first part showing them what the tools can do and do well. We spend the next part showing them, but this is stuff you shouldn't try and do with it because it doesn't do it well. And then the last part is really introspective for them. If I think about my work, you think about your workflow. How could you use these capabilities to make your workflow or your business process better? And I think that's where it is different for different people and different workflows and different states of their own mental way they work. I personally use the tools all the time, mostly as that sort of thought bouncing partner, but also a lot as a better search engine. Right? Instead of searching based off keywords, I can search based off ideas, concepts, and implications of concepts. And that level of the model understands not the words that I type in the box, but the intent and the concepts that those words carry with them, that latent understanding of the knowledge or the conceptual space, and are able to bring that to the search results. That's the kind of thing that I use it for in my work. Now, I know somebody else who's an advertising creative, they use it all the time as a generator of random, spontaneous kind of things. And then they take that and they use that as inputs to their own creative process to generate what they need to create from a graphic design perspective and otherwise there. So I think it's different for different people. You just have to use the tools, though, to figure out how it's going to fit for you and the type of work you're doing.
So Malik tees up that book by describing AI as kind of the first general purpose technology aimed squarely at knowledge work.
Yep.
And oh, by the way, we've built the world's largest economy largely on knowledge work.
Right.
And so the opportunities for disruption are massive, and no one really knows how this could all shake out.
I'll give you another R&D example, though. Yeah. So scientific publications in the medical area, 3, 4, 5,000 new ones a day. How can a scientist or a doctor even think about keeping abreast of any of those publications that are going to be meaningful to their research and their work? We have a tool that we've built that takes every single new publication that comes out every single day, reads it, extracts the knowledge. This paper talks about this gene being treated in this disease having this side effect on this population of people. And we put all of that into a large knowledge graph with the citations to those papers. And then a scientist can come along and say, I'm interested in any time anything comes up about new connections to the treatment of glioblastoma, right? And so suddenly, instead of them having to go read all these papers to find anything that's new, the system is recommending them, hey, there's this new paper that just came out about the potential link between this gene and glioblastoma, or this gene and this disease in that way. And so that's one of those examples where that knowledge work of processing literature, the pace and the scale has outpaced what a human can do, but now with the tool to augment that, I can bring that back into the controllable space of that employee.
But it raises an interesting question that is in line with another one from the crowd today that asks about hallucinations and some of these things that we've run into with the public ChatGPTs and the like. How do you know the critical evaluation of that input is of adequate quality to be able to draw the conclusions or to accelerate whatever work you're doing in, say, pharmaceuticals or some of these other fields where it's really critical that you get it right?
Yep. How do you know when a student submits a paper that they've got that critical, that they understand that, right? The fact is we have to, as humans, not sacrifice our role and responsibility in critically thinking about and validating the outputs. A large language model is a language model, not a knowledge model. It is not there, no matter how much it might seem like it is doing it, it is not there to give you facts. It is not there to present answers to questions. It's there to suggest the most probable words that might be the answer to the question you have posed. But you still have the obligation and the responsibility to think critically about what is being presented to you. That's why asking and making the tools provide citations is such an important thing, because then you can go follow the citations and validate what's there. And this leads into the fact that I am of the school of thought that says that in many cases, jobs will not go away. I do not believe that there will be as massive a reduction in the job force as people think. I think what we will see is a huge transformation of what work is being done by folks in those roles. If I look at a medical writer, where a majority of their time may have been spent writing the first draft of something, and then following it up with a period of time of validating and editing and review, now the drafting process is vastly reduced in the amount of time, but the editing and review process means they have to go and double check all the things that are done. And so to my belief is that the vast majority of people who are seeing hallucinations and that kind of stuff is actually because they're not using the model in the right way. They're not using the model as a language model. They're using it as a knowledge model or a fact model in that space.
You got to make sure to use the hammer as a hammer.
Use the hammer as a hammer. You could try and turn screws in with the flat part on the back of the hammer, but not very efficient.
So that's actually tees up where I want to go next, which is if these are more appropriate uses of the tools, how do we equip our students to do so well and in a way that's marketable in the workforce? What does all of this mean for higher education, for curriculum development, for skills building?
Provocative, faculty in the audience, apologies in advance, brace yourself, but ultimately a lot of curriculum has to change. And I'll especially talk to computer science folks, just as an example. So much of computer science education has recently been focused on teaching software languages and software development, and not as much focus on underlying computer architecture and understanding the way that architectures work. It has moved so much into the applied software language space, and that's an unfortunate thing, because the curriculum needs to prepare the students for a world where the language translation of converting a human language into a software development language is handled by a language model. But the understanding of how to take a conceptual problem and map that to human language in a way that that model can understand how to appropriately build the software, and then how to take that output software and appropriately frame it and extend it and edit and validate it for use in an enterprise context. That's the future of software development work. It's not in writing code, it's in editing and validating code, and it's in constructing the framing for that code development to the model. And so when we think about the impact of computer science curriculum, that's potentially huge, especially for institutions where the computer science programs have become, over the past 10, 20 years, so focused on teaching software development instead of teaching computer architecture, computer theory, and those types of places.
So what about beyond computer science, though? I mean, 'cause it's maybe easiest to wrap our heads around what needs to happen in computer science.
Yeah.
Because it is a technology that we're dealing with, right? And so the building of those technologies, I mean, it makes sense to discuss in the context of computer science, but what about for the art student or the accounting student or the history student or the biology student?
And it gets to one of the things I used to get asked a lot, like, I want to go into data science. How do I become a data scientist? And the argument I said was, well, you shouldn't be trying to become a data scientist. What you should be trying to become is somebody who works in a functional domain that applies data science. The data science technologies and techniques anybody can learn. But what you can't learn is how to translate those techniques into a domain and understand the problem and function of that domain without education in the domain. And so when I say AI is a tool, I think of it like that. Could anybody imagine studying in almost any discipline without a computer at this point? No. The computer is a tool. AI is just a tool in the same way. And so I think when you think about the domain side curriculum of art or history or finance or law, the question should be, how do we include and make this tool part of the study of what is core to the discipline, what is core to that space? And that's going to be different for every domain. I have a friend who's a painter. And about 5 years ago, when he saw like the generative AI for images and stuff, and this is actually longer than 5 years ago because he's a pretty smart cookie, he started signing the backs of all of his paintings by pricking his finger and embedding a drop of his blood in a fingerprint in epoxy on the back of all of his paintings. And he explained that the reason he was doing that is because even if somebody is able to recreate the entire painting in every exquisite detail, a robot that can mimic his brush strokes and everything else to the infinite detail, there's no way for them to make an actual authentic one of his paintings without his fingerprint of blood encased on the back of that painting. And so it's a fascinating statement if you stop to think about it, about, well, what is value in the art world? Well, value is that uniqueness of representation. It's that authenticity of the artist's experience in translating that, right? He's now guaranteed that none of his work will ever be able to be sold as authentically his unless it's authentically his. And I think that's where, when you take these other domains like art and history, how do you make that domain experience that authentic value that you're delivering? And how do you make AI part of that? Do you, if you're a lawyer, how do you use AI to draft a legal brief? But you know when you go into a courtroom, if you're in litigation and you're competing against somebody else, if you're both using AI tools to draft that litigation, it's going to be the same basic thing on both sides, because the AI tools will statistically produce the center of the bell curve. But understanding how to influence that to make your argument more persuasive than the average argument would be, or to explain the nuance of something in a way that the average discussion wouldn't do, that's one of the interesting challenges that I think we face. A high school English teacher at the local high school, when I explained this was how the models worked and everything, her response for her next essay assignment for the students in her class was she gave them the essay question, and she gave them a fully AI-generated essay responding to the question. And she said, "This is a C." If you want to get a C on this assignment, your essay needs to at least match the level of depth and content and everything as this piece. And it can't be the same. You got to write your own, but it's got to at least match this content and everything there. And if you want to get better, you've got to go beyond that. And she said what was fascinating was she realized that even the students who turned in C papers, who clearly had just put the question into a ChatGPT and generated a different response, they actually understood the material better after the fact. Because the act of cross-checking their generated answer against her generated answer to make sure they had all the different pieces and parts of it meant that they internalized at least some of the knowledge and understanding that was in that paper. And so that's one example I think is a great example of how we have to think about changing the way these tools are used in education. And I was in a second grade classroom where the teacher had the students in the classroom intentionally all using ChatGPT. But she wasn't spending time with them on how to use ChatGPT. She was spending time with them on how to use it right, how to actually look at the results and ask questions about the results and validate the results. And so I think that's where we see that the curriculum and education in all of these other disciplines is going to have to recognize that this tool for accessing language and knowledge as content is now here.
So we're about at the end of about at the end of our time, and I want to ask kind of one last question, maybe going back to the sleepless nights.
Yeah.
Think of 2 sleepless nights. One where you're sleepless because you're so scared about what's going to happen,
Yep.
and then the second, you're sleepless because you're so excited you can't quite go to sleep. Right. What's the scary sleepless night application, and what's exciting to come?
The scary sleepless night application comes back to people spending too much time thinking about whether they can do something and not whether they should do something. We as a species have a history of shooting ourselves in the foot by not spending the time to think about what we should be doing and just trying to see if we can do something. And so I think that my sleepless night fears come from us not having, as a society, enough conversations about that. That we are just plowing ahead with saying, look at this amazing thing that it can do. Look at this amazing thing that it can do. Instead of saying, well, where should we be applying this? How should we be applying this to income inequality problems? How should we be applying this to environmental problems? How should we be applying this to all the things that actually are affecting the quality of life and safety of human life in the planet today? So that's what gives me sleepless, is that we're not having enough of those conversations. And what was your other sleepless night?
What are you most excited to see?
What am I most excited to see? What I'm most excited to see is that the ability to make an impact that the work I do is able to be done so quickly and efficiently that I can go home and spend time with my family and spend time in my wood shop and do that kind of stuff instead of spending 10, 12, 14 hours a day in the office trying to make cases for investment, trying to put together the reasons why we should be doing things, that those cases become clear, and I think the AI tools are helping us to reach that point much more quickly than we would otherwise.
So excited by the opportunity to go home and be uniquely human.
Yep, exactly.
Terrific. Brian, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so
Really
much.
appreciate it.
It was fun.
Before we go, I have a long list of people to thank. I forgot to introduce myself in case you're wondering who I am. I'm Sudesh. I'm the Dean of the Romain College of Business. I want to thank Brian Martin for so generously sharing his time and expertise with us and his insights. Dr. Nick Rue, as always, a masterful host and conversationalist. Jeffrey Berger, a friend of Brian Martin, friend of the Romain College and friend of USI, for making this happen and for his support. USI Foundation, I see Andrea there, and thank you for your support. Of course, nothing happens without the Romain endowment and the Romain family, and many are here, and so thank all of you for supporting us. Our marketing and communications office, our IT office, our own Romain College office, Darla, Hendricks, Tina. There's a long list of people I'm sure I'll be missing, and I'll get that whole barrage of emails like the chief legal counsel got at AbbVie, so I apologize. And in advance, but last and not the least, I thank all of you. So thank you.
That was fun.